Good morning, everyone. This is Chair French convening the regularly scheduled business meeting of the Kansas Corporation Commission for Tuesday, January 4th. On today's agenda, we have 13 consent agenda items, no noticed orders, but we do have one discussion item. Let us begin with our consent agenda. Commissioners, you've had the opportunity to review all of the proposed items on the consent agenda. Let me ask at this time whether you have any questions or comments about those items, beginning with Commissioner Keene.
None for me, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Duffy.
Good morning. I have no questions and I move approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. Is there any further discussion on that motion? Hearing none, those in favor, please vote aye.
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 Aye. Consent agenda is approved. We now move to our one discussion item, and this is an update to the commission on the KCC's application for federal formula grants to plug abandoned wells. And our presenter for this item is Mr. Ryan Hoffman, the director of the KCC's Conservation Division. Ryan, take it away.
I will. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Be glad to update you on where we stand in this process right now. As I know all of you are aware, the federal infrastructure bill contained roughly $4.2 billion for plugging abandoned wells. And that is broken out in three different large umbrellas. And then each umbrella has several different spokes, if you will, within them where money is contained for plugging abandoned wells. The main one I will talk about today is the formula grant. The formula grant consists of the largest portion of those dollars. There's roughly $2 billion available to the states. And it's called a formula grant because the Department of Interior is using a formula to decide how much each state gets. That formula consists of three variables: the number of documented orphaned wells, how much the state estimates it's going to cost to plug those wells, and then the number of jobs lost in the oil and gas industry. Part of the motivation behind providing these dollars to the states is to try and help the oil and gas industry recover from some of the losses as part of the pandemic. With regard to Kansas's specific application, I probably titled my presentation incorrectly. We didn't file an application yet. We filed our notice of intent to apply. The provision in the bill required us to submit our notice of intent 45 days after the enactment of the infrastructure bill. That was last Thursday. So after that point, the Department of Interior has 30 days to determine how to allot that $2 billion among the states who have provided notice that they will apply. In our notice document, the numbers I used that will go into serve as the variables, I should say, for Kansas's formula in terms of the documented number of orphan wells. We had 5,477 documented orphan wells. And one of the key words there is documented. I know we talk a lot about our abandoned well database, then we talk about wells where further investigation is needed before we can get wells into that database. That 5,477 is the abandoned well database figure. That's what we use for our legislative report. It's the one that we can say confidently, we've looked at these wells, we know there's a well there. But prior to submitting this, we had about 30 days to do a little more research on some of the wells that were not in the abandoned well database, but were in our well database as PL, which meant plugging list, or wells that were eligible to be investigated to be put on the plugging list. So in those 30 days, our staff in District 1, 2, and 4 were able to look at more than 600 wells and well records and get those wells added into the database if they were there. That was one of the things that was really stressed in our meetings with IOGCC and the Department of Interior was, don't just throw a bunch of numbers here to boost your total number. This is documented. You have to have somebody go out and actually see a well and document, in a field report that they were there. So I would give a lot of credit to our district staff for going out in that short period of time and putting eyes on over 600 wells so that we could either update our number in the abandoned well database and add that orphan well, or get it taken care of the proper way. The next major component is the cost. And a lot of the discussion in the weeks leading up to our filing of this with Department of Interior was that we should use an average cost. I'm sure you have all read how riveting our legislative abandoned well report is. You see there's a figure in there for the 5-year average per district per well. It was very tempting to just take that number and apply it to the number of wells by district. But in discussing that with the district supervisors, that wasn't going to give us a very accurate number. The costs have increased tremendously in plugging wells, such that we're having a difficult time getting our agreed contractors to bid on projects at the prices they agreed to 2 years ago. So what we looked at is we looked at our invoices for some of the most recent projects that we had to sole source and did some phone calls. And what we found is that we were very low. So we used that number. Basically, what we came up with was roughly a 56% increase over our 5-year average. And we used that number to figure our dollar amounts. And the dollar amount that we came up with is $35,765,916. So that is a tremendous amount of money to spend. And I think it's very doable, but it's also, it's not so scary that it's too much that there's no way we could do it. The last component was the jobs lost. We worked with the Department of Labor, their Bureau of Statistics, and they provided us with a number of 401 jobs lost since the beginning of the pandemic. And that's about a 8.4% decrease over the time that data was available. That factor or that variable will actually have the least amount of weight in whatever the final formula Department of Interior agrees to use. And I say that knowing that in the discussions, the number of wells is going to have the largest weight. The cost per well will have the next largest, and then the jobs lost will be the least amount. Because there are certain states that the industry has recovered much faster than others, and is actually, they have no job loss from before the pandemic to now. So that's why that factor has very little weight. We will know basically the results of the formula by the end of January. That's when the Department of Interior has to release that amount, or release the amount that we are eligible to apply for. There's a lot of groundwork before we actually file an application for those funds. And I say that because primarily the major caveat with this formula grant is that you have to spend it within 5 years of application. And I mentioned $35 million before. In the history of the abandoned well plugging program, I don't believe we've ever spent $35 million over the course of 5 years. So we are going to have to, I would say, put on our full court press, since we are technically in basketball season. I know the national championship hasn't happened in football just yet, but I think full court press is appropriate. And to me, that involves a lot of things. As you're all aware, 3 years ago, we went through this process where we did a great outreach to try and attract more contractors to our abandoned well plugging program. And we were successful in a lot of ways, but we're seeing now 3 years later that all of that work can be undone very quickly by price changes within the industry. So some of the things that we will do is we will reach out to every contractor that is listed as having the ability to plug wells in the state of Kansas. And we will probably contact them by mail. If they are in Kohler, we will contact them by email, and we will try our best to get them to attend an informational meeting where we will talk about how you become a state vendor. Because the process is the same no matter if you're going to clean bathrooms or plug abandoned wells. You have to go through the same process. There's an application process. And what we found last time we went through this is that's the most daunting process for most of these vendors, is they see a 45-page application or 60-page application, and it looks like it can be very time consuming in a lot of areas where you can trip up. So we will go through that application with them step by step, and then be there as a resource for them as they're filling it out. Next, we're going to do a little bit of outreach through the trade organizations. I've already talked with Cuyahoga. They have graciously agreed to allow me to do a webinar in February. to talk about this process so that we can try and reach as many of their members as possible. As part of that outreach effort, one of the things that we're going to be trying to drive home is we know there are people and operators who don't necessarily want to be state contract vendors all the time. But here's a 5-year window where there is a nice sum of money out there that maybe this can entice them into that process to do a little work in their areas outside of what they would normally use their equipment to do. And lastly, one of the main things that we're doing that will help this is we are working, as you remember, House Bill 2022 had a provision that required us to adopt regulations to establish a abandoned well plugging reimbursement fund, or process, I should say, not a fund. I think that is one of the areas where we can overcome our shortfalls in attracting vendors is, like I said, people who don't want to go through the state contract process, but have the equipment, the means necessary to plug wells, can still find a way to apply to us and get it done so that we can then pay them to plug wells. So that's the last part of that. Having said all that, based on our experience 3 years ago, getting all of the vendors signed up that we did, I can tell you that that's going to take at least 6 months. Realistically, when you throw the regulations in, let's say a year. So we'd probably be looking at filing our application sometime in 2023. By then, we should have a sufficient number of vendors in place. We should have had plenty of time to get the word out and get that money then started coming into Kansas. Because once we apply for it, I think they have 60 days to give it to us. Department of Interior does. So it's one of those where we will need to hit the ground running and have some projects out there already when we put them out. Before I move on from the formula grant, I do want to entertain any questions on that, because I will talk also about another one called an initial grant here in a second.
Ryan, that's a lot of great information. I've got a couple questions, but let me turn first to the other commissioners to see if they had anything on the formula grant. Just raise your hand if you've got something, either one. Go ahead, Commissioner Duffy.
I will say that, as I said on the meetings with Ryan, with the Department of Interior, and we normally don't work with them. And when we back at the IOGCC meeting, we're so prepared compared to other states. They were flailing is the word I would use. Really they didn't have a program for plugging abandoned wells, a lot of states, because they have so few. So they definitely wanted the cost to be the overriding factor, because a lot of their abandoned wells, if they have a handful, they're just extremely deep. But I have to say that when we talked to the two officials, we were knowledgeable. There's a word called obligated. What does that mean? We know what it means for us in the accounting world for the state of Kansas. They have a different, when they say obligated, it means that the money has been spent. When we say obligated, it means it's under contract. So they were very good about saying use your own program, but there are still some major things that need to be defined and worked out. But without IOGCC staff working with the DOI every day to ensure that the balance is in favor of the states doing well in this program, I would say we would be so far behind. But Lori and her group have done an excellent job. Ryan and our staff just moved mountains to get information in that was quality and timely. And I think they recognize that. The folks from DOI know that this isn't our first rodeo with well plugging. And so credit to both Lori and to Ryan and his staff. I will also say I visited with Lieutenant Governor Tolan. He said, let us help you in these communities reach out on a personal level and make contacts, help you make contacts beyond operators like local units of government or whatever. So they definitely want to help how they can. And I really think we need to visit with them and figure out where they factor in, since he leads the Department on Commerce. Also, I did visit with the governor's staff. She is so thrilled about this program. I visited with her one night and the staff, and she's thrilled about this program. And as you are aware, she was one of 12 governors to sign the letter that supported this legislation. And she wants to make it a priority in the next few months to ensure that folks understand this is once in a lifetime opportunity. So I think we've got, all feet on the floor and moving forward. But Ryan, thank you, being the steady Eddie that so many other states were not. And we're fourth in the number of wells, right? As of the last list. Pennsylvania must have one every 5 feet, I swear. Their number of wells were huge, but I hope we prevail that the number of wells becomes definitely the guiding factor. Thank you.
Commissioner Duffy. Commissioner Keen, did you have any questions or comments on this first part?
Thank you, Chair French. Yes, just a bit if I could. Thank you, Ryan, for an excellent presentation. As the chair suggested, it's chock full of information there, and traps for the unwary and Rubik's cubes, it strikes me, all combined into one. Obviously, while the amounts that we're requesting are to a certain extent, these are estimates, the amounts being requested need to be credible. And I think the methodology that you've utilized in approaching the task has lent to that credibility. So I commend you for that, Ryan. I think it really was. You've gone from the ground up. I know you sought information from the district offices and who utilized that in coming up with what we think are some real world estimates here. I think it's really important too that we be thoughtful with regard to the amounts that we request, in the sense that they're realistic, they're well thought through. I think that's the case here, that they're appropriate to our needs, and also appropriate, as you suggest, to our ability to satisfactorily and realistically perform. Because the complicating factor here, I think, and again, you alluded to it, in performance, is that to a certain extent, we're going to be competing with the private sector for limited well plugging service providers. And that could be one of the really critical hurdles to overcome. You're anticipating that. I commend you for that. I think you're trying to move forward with being proactive and trying to, again, go through some of the traps you ran a couple of years ago, seeking out well servicing providers, making them aware of what it is that's available out there, and trying to proceed in that way. I'd add just one other footnote to what I'm going to say here. I'm not trying to detract from what it is what additional you have to say, and hopefully I don't, but I think it's really important to understand here that, notwithstanding the receipt of these federal grants, if we're going to adequately protect the public interest, and we're going to protect the state's environment and our important freshwater resources, and assure that we have adequate funding to cope with abandoned wells way beyond the short term. And in a sense, this is short-term money. It may be 5 years. Those 5 years are going to go by like the blink of an eye, I suggest. So, especially with some of the lead times that you indicated are built into the system, that reduces some of the time available to actually plug wells. I think given that, it's obvious we're going to have to rely as a state to continue to rely really on the availability of funds in our state well plugging fee fund accounts. That's really important. So the receipt of federal funds here does not diminish the importance or significance of the need for funds in the state's well plugging fee funds. And I would appreciate it if you could maybe address that point for a moment for us.
Well, certainly. With regard to that point, the number that we provided for our notice here are our documented wells. We have almost roughly the same amount that I would call undocumented that we have some sort of record that needs further inspection. So in reality, maybe 35 million will be great to tackle what we know about. But going forward, we still have the money in our account that we need to address at what we come across as we move forward and as time progresses. And there will be other funds available for those wells that are not documented at this time that we document later. And this program runs through September 30th, 2030. So that's why, we can wait. If it takes us a year to make our application, that's fine. We still have until 2028 to get that done, and the money will be there. With regard to the need for those funds, I think that what I would, if you want to call them undocumented, yes, the undocumented wells, I think based on what we're seeing, if it's an equal number to what we're applying for, the money that is currently available is not enough to take care of what we think still will exist even after we take care of all of these.
So Ryan, that question was raised a lot about, well, we have wells, but they're not documented. And I think it was said over and again during the presentations to the states that this money is available to 2030. So there'll be opportunity to plug beyond our 5,477 documented wells, knowing that we find as many new wells as we plug each year. And I would agree with you, Commissioner Keene. I think it's important that we stop adding wells to our list, that we put measures in place that will prevent those wells becoming abandoned. And whether that's, I think it's through the pocketbook, whether it's increasing the assurance on each well that the operator has. I think we need to really be mindful going forward how we address that, so we don't continue to grow our list in the future, that we stop it and draw a line and say, enough is enough, and not have this problem 10 years from now that we're still sitting on new abandoned wells. So I think kind of burning the candle at both ends to get to the middle is where we need to be.
Ryan, I had just a couple small questions. Most of it's been addressed with this discussion, but you mentioned how much the cost has gone up for well plugging just over the last couple of years. And I'm just curious, in your experience or in talking to vendors, what you primarily attribute that to, whether it's inflation, supply chain, actual cost of materials. Is it the fact that the price of oil's rebounded and there's other work to do? What would you attribute it to?
I think my short answer, and maybe the reason why I smiled prematurely there, is the answer is yes. It's all of those things combined together. The supply chain issue, the staffing issue, that is something that we hear from our service companies, is that they're competing with each other for staff, that they have a hard time attracting staff and hard time attracting truck drivers to move their equipment from location to location. So it's yes, it's all of the above. Yeah.
Well, and it speaks to your point of, I totally agree. We're going to need to put on the full court press, and it's a real opportunity for us to get a lot done. And it's an opportunity for the industry. And I agree with, using every avenue we can to make this opportunity known throughout the state, and I like the strategy you've laid out. And I like a lot of what Commissioner Duffy said as well on that issue. The other thing, maybe to just give this a little more, I don't know, simplify it for me a little bit and for the public. You touched on this, but if you could just talk about, through this pot of money and other aspects of the program, could you maybe frame the scale of what we have the opportunity to do here versus what we do on an annual basis or what we've done over the last 10 years. Yeah, I understand it's a pretty big opportunity. And if you could just speak to that briefly, I think that would be helpful.
Well, it's based on the sheer numbers. If we averaged say you split it over the 5 years, we would be plugging more than 1,000 wells per year. Right now, we had a really good year in 2020, and we did 330. So
yeah,
or 342, I believe was the actual number. So 3 times what we can do on an annual basis is the impact that we could make here, and that's why we would be able to drive that number down significantly, if not to zero.
That's really big. The only other question I think I had was, I was just curious. I mean, I know there's this formula grant that's got the time limit on it. We got to spend, it's big, but you got to spend it quickly. But I know there's other opportunities. I think that's what you wanted to get to in the next part. So why don't I release it back to you and let you just continue with your presentation? Well,
I mentioned, there were the 3 umbrellas really, and the other one that's most pressing in terms of our needs and what we could use would be an initial grant. There are 2 different types of initial grant. One is up to 25 million. The other is up to 5 million. In total, there's 775 million available to states under those grants. This is where Commissioner Duffy was talking about obligated, and what does that really mean? In looking at the 2 different dollar amounts, the one that makes the most sense for the state of Kansas, I think, would be the $5 million loan or grant, I should say. And the reason that makes the most sense is it's not specifically earmarked for plugging abandoned wells. You can use it for your program to enhance your program. And for me, I think that, in talking with the district supervisors, what that really means, if you think about it, if we're going to go triple the number of abandoned wells that we're plugging each year, we need more people, and we need to be able to get them to these locations so that they can witness the activities. They can be there to help find abandoned wells as necessary. But also beyond that, it means that I think it would be wise for us to use that on people here to go through some of those records that are still just records that need to be set up for investigation. So that way we can work through those records and truly identify our universe of orphaned or abandoned wells and make that as finite as possible. And that, with regard to the up to $5 million, it's the next pressing deadline. It's 180 days after after the act was signed. So we're looking somewhere around May 15th, where we will need to make some sort of application for it. This is the one that is obligate, and we have to obligate the funds within 90 days. And Department of Interior, I think, is willing at least to discuss what obligate means. They seem to recognize that states don't use obligate the way the federal government does. So nonetheless, what that means for us is after that 180 days, we'll still have 90 days to do something with that money. And if that's hire people or order pickups or computers or metal detectors, whatever it is, we will have to be moving to do that. And therein lies one of the major issues is, I don't know how many people have tried to buy a vehicle lately. But if we were to try and get transportation for our staff so that they could get around, that's going to be a major hurdle. I think hiring the people is something that I'm probably a little naive and a little optimistic that we'll be able to do. But I also view that as another opportunity where we can recruit and find, even if this is these will be temporary positions, but maybe we can use them as a bridge to get to some full-time permanent employees, because essentially using this as a succession planning, because we have plenty of staff who are within 5 years of retirement that as they leave their posts, we could then transition some of these temporary employees into those full-time roles, and we won't have to train them up. They will be ready to go. So that's the initial grant. I didn't really intend to talk much about the performance grants. That's where there's another $1.5 billion. That's the one that we've discussed the least through IOGCC and Department of Interior. But those are the ones, as we discussed earlier, have more future purpose, I believe. And where the one that would probably be most applicable to Kansas is there is a match, really. So if we, go out and we plug 300 wells and we spend, $5 million doing it, we can apply to have that $5 million matched by the federal government. And I think we can do that on a fiscal year basis.
Well, Ryan, that actually reminded me, I had one other question, which was, how do we, if we have this influx of federal funding, how do we ensure that we're safeguarding our existing state funds? And I think, that raised for me, well, there's a need to safeguard it, because in the future, we're going to need to show performance through those programs. But can you speak to your thought process on protecting existing state well plugging funds, even though we're going to have this influx for other programs?
Well, I think we're still going to be using those funds, and we can demonstrate how we're using them, and it may actually free them up. We have several remediation projects that are not necessarily abandoned well specific, where we can show we're making some tangible results and where we're using that money. So there is that. And also, I would always point out to the fact that this is just a temporary amount or a temporary influx. And it took us years to get our balance where it is right now. And we will definitely need it. And I think that's something that through the work of going through the other data and cleaning up the data and identifying that universe of abandoned wells will further help solidify the need for that money, because we can show that we will need it.
So I would add to, having worked with federal funds over my career, the federal government frowns on giving federal money to a state for a program and find out that the existing funds were jerked away and used for something else. That is a big no-no, and they will ask, and they do not want to see those monies repurposed in an agency, because this is a one-time shot, and they know that the program needs to be able to go on. This is the shot in the arm to jumpstart the cleanup in so many states of the thousands and thousands of abandoned wells. But it's not going to resolve the entire problem. And so they really do frown upon states repurposing money that was specified for the ongoing program. And that will be probably part of the application. I would not be surprised that they don't ask that question.
Ryan, I kind of cut you off. Did you have additional presentation?
No, that would be it. I didn't intend to spend a lot of time talking about either the initial grant or the performance grants. The main focus is the formula. Good.
Are there any further questions for Ryan on this? Commissioner Keene, Commissioner Duffy, anything that on his final remarks?
None for me, thank you. Appreciate your work, Ryan.
Thank you. And I would also be remiss if I didn't thank Bob Parker and Doug and Fiscal for their help in filling out the notice. I mean, it was a one-page notice, but there was information on there that I didn't have, and they were quick to provide it and very helpful. And also, Erica Smith did a wonderful job of working with the districts to get the abandoned well database updated so that we would have those numbers and those records cleaned.
I would add one, if folks, companies from other states like Oklahoma want to come plug in Kansas, I imagine that they will be allowed to. This is not Kansas specific. Has that finally been addressed? Yes.
If they were wanting to plug a well, they will need to be licensed in Kansas, and we have plenty of contractors out of Oklahoma that are licensed in Kansas. And
right.
We would be happy to navigate them through that process.
Good. That question did come up. And two, I would like to say I'm glad to hear that Cuyahoga is allowing you to do a webinar. In visiting with Senator Kramer's staff in North Dakota, they were a little surprised that the association was not supporting this legislation. And so I'm hoping maybe they see the value for economic development in this state, keeping people employed in the industry in this state, and also making a huge environmental, that stake in the sand of plugging these abandoned wells and getting them off our list. So I look forward to being a participant in that, and and working with Lieutenant Governor Toland and his staff and spreading the good word of this program. So kudos to you. You're going to have to clone yourself.
I don't think anybody wants that.
Yeah. Okay. One more question. When you said over the 30-day time period, you said districts 1, 2, and 4.
Correct.
Okay. And district 3 had already been doing their own thing, right?
They are, but I also, just looking at that 30-day time period, there's a docketed matter coming before the commission
Yes.
in the near term that required an inordinate amount of staff time and field inspection. That's documented in the record. I'm sure you can see that we were not able to really devote as much time there, but it will be an ongoing project this year with District 3.
What a Herculean effort to get that done. Bravo to the men and women of those 3 districts and working that. Yeah. Thank you, Ryan. This was very informative.
Well, if there's no further discussion, I would just add, Ryan, thank you for all your work and for all the other staff that have supported the effort to this point. And it's, we're definitely not even, I don't know that we're in sight of any kind of finish line. We're just in the beginning stages, but I appreciate all there has been a lot of preparatory work to even get our feet underneath ourselves and know which direction we should be pointed. And I think you've got us pointed in the right direction. And I know you want to be conservative with what you think you can do here and be aware of the challenges. And we certainly want to we want to safeguard any funds we use, whether they're state or federal, and we want to be efficient with them. But I can't help but also be a little excited that this is a really big opportunity for the state to take care of an issue that it looms over a lot of states. It's not just Kansas, but this is something that looms over the industry, and we can make a really big dent in it by utilizing these funds. So thank you again, for your work, and thanks for the presentation. And I'm sure we'll have another of these coming up as the process moves forward. It's a big deal.
Absolutely. I'd be more than happy to update you in the near future as we move forward.
Very good. Well, if there is no further business to come before us this morning, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn. Those in favor, please vote aye.
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 Aye. We are adjourned. Thank
Go
you, Ryan.
Cats.
Thank you, everyone.
Ema.